Hi, shalom, friends. They once asked a very successful business person, what is the secret of his success? He seems always to be successful in his decisions. He said, well, I have a circle of acquaintances, and I often talk to them. I get suggestions and advice. But then he turned to the question. He said, but for expert advice, I talk to myself. Now, you might take it as something humorous or arrogant, but I believe that there's a great deal of truth to that. And that is, in many respects, the greatest expert is ourselves. No one knows our talents, our capabilities, as well as ourselves. I sometimes like to play in my mind an imagination game. So I imagine Moshe would come to a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, and the social worker perhaps would say, Moses, what is your dream? And he would say, well, I would like to redeem my people from Egypt, from the slavery, the drudgery, the suffering. And this expert would say, well, that's quite a daunting task. What do you have in terms of experience? And Moshe would say, well, I've been taking care of sheep for close to 50 years. And the fellow would look at Moshe and say, well, that doesn't seem to be that impressive. Where have you been? He said, well, I'm a refugee. I ran away from Egypt. Well, why did you do that? Well, I couldn't control my temper. I saw someone beating up an innocent man, so I killed him. And tell me something, do you have understanding of the people that you want to redeem? Like, for example, do you come from a family that tasted the whip of Egyptian slavery? So, oh, no. I grew up in the palace, very pampered. Perhaps your family is a family of slaves? Oh, no, they're very respected. They've never done a day's work for Pharaoh. Okay, I could keep playing this out, but what do you think? Would you encourage Moshe to be the great leader that he became? You would say, based on everything that I hear and everything that I know of you, maybe you should think of being a clerk in someone's factory. You have no qualifications. And indeed, I often wonder, in the story of the Chumash, in the story of the Bible, God talks to Moshe by the burning bush and says, I want to send you to Pharaoh, and you should represent me to take the Jewish people out of slavery. And Moshe says, you got to be kidding. I can't speak. I don't have the power. I'm not eloquent to go to a Pharaoh, an emperor, a ruler, a despot, a dictator, call him whatever you want. You have to know how to talk. You have to talk with finesse, you have to be a diplomat, and you have to be fluent. I'm not. And I wonder, why did the Torah even tell us this? And I think the answer is because God says to Moshe, I chose you. I gave you everything that you need to possess to become the greatest leader of mankind. And not only that, you will be able to relate to the greatest and the simplest in the same way. You will teach them the Torah. And Moshe says, but I'm not a general. Indeed, he becomes a general. He fights against two great kings. He actually mentors a general, his student Joshua. So the story of the Chumash, it's a fascinating story, and it's not only a story, it's an instruction for life. And amongst the numerous or perhaps countless lessons that we could derive from the entire unfolding of Moshe, the leader and the Redeemer, is God gives people talents and potential that certainly others do not see. And occasionally, even the person himself does not see. Which leads us to a question. How do you know if you have that talent? If no one told you you could be a great educator and you have no degrees in education, how do you know you have the talent to be an educator? For that matter, if no one told you that you have great financial acumen and that you have a real business mind and you could smell a straight deal from a crooked one, but I don't have an MBA, how would you know? And one of the indications, a very powerful indication, is if the circumstances that you're in warrants and demands a certain talent. So, for example, you might have thought that you're not a great teacher or leader, and for whatever reason, there's a need for a substitute teacher. And that the fellow who you're substituting for will be out for 6 weeks. Now, this is not something that necessarily you looked for, but the community pushes you. Look, you're the only one that speaks Hebrew, you're the only one in Judaic studies, you're the only one that went to a yeshiva, so here you are. Now, this is not something you thought about, teaching in a classroom, and actually being a teacher, period. But if the circumstances push you to a certain place, then it's God hinting to you very, very strongly, you have that talent, you have that ability. Because God will never give us a situation that we cannot handle. So you talk to, for example, a young lady who doesn't have the most patience, and you tell her, when you get married, God willing, you'll have 6 children. She says, are you kidding? I have barely patience for adults. I'll never have patience for children. And then she's a believer. She doesn't use birth control, and she has child after child. What does that mean? That means she has the patience. It's in her. It might be a struggle to bring it out and to practice it, but God would never give her a situation where she needs patience and she's not capable of exhibiting it. And the same thing is wherever you are and whatever you do. And that's why the Rabbi once remarked to a very talented, very, very talented young man who was in philosophy, and the Rebbe spoke to him about what is he going to be doing to better the life of Jewish students. And this young man replied something to the extent like, we find ourselves in this and this situation. And the Rebbe interrupted him. We find ourselves in this, you put yourself, you became a student. You're a philosophy major or something to that effect. You have abilities and capabilities of influencing others and educating them. So what do you mean you're not ready for this? You're capable. Go do it. Let's do what they call a flying jump. Here we are in the secular year 2024. And we look around and we say, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's way beyond us. And I'll focus primarily from a Jewish perspective in the Holy Land. It's just terrible. 4 months, they're fighting for their existence. There's so much negative press. There's so much suffering. I don't know what to do. And why are we here? We didn't pick to be in this position, in this time, and in this place. So clearly there's a divine plan that's unfolding. And if we are part of this divine plan, then we have abilities and talents, I keep using those 2 words, and we have the strength to overcome a lot of negativity. We can bring blessing. We can grow spiritually. We can bring light where there's a lot of confusion and darkness, because otherwise we would not be here. So the next time someone tells you, my advice to you, listen carefully and respectfully, and then ask yourself for expert advice. Is this really me? Is it really true that I cannot do what this person, the professional, said? On a personal level, I've seen it in Jewish motherhood. We have, God blessed us with a large family, and we often had to go to the pediatrician. And very often the pediatrician would say, well, I suggest this antibiotic and that antibiotic, and we would listen respectfully and take the prescription. And many times my wife would say, no, that's not what they need. They need something else. And inevitably, like way in the 95% percentile, mother knows best. And the same thing is true if, God forbid, you have a child in school misbehaving or not producing, and the child psychologist gives you a 3-lettered for ADD, DDD, XYZ, and put them on this and that. And you say, okay, that's good advice. What's expert advice? My heart tells me he needs a grandfather in his life. My life tells me he needs a tutor. My life tells me he needs time to run around. There's nothing wrong with him. He doesn't need drugs. We abdicate too much of our ability to make decisions, and we give it over to experts. But they're not experts. They give advice, and more often than not, they're seeing it from a perspective of a professional, which often is very correct and sometimes misses the mark. And how would we know? Ask the expert. If you say to yourself, I don't know, then clearly the advice that was given is valid. If your heart tells you it's not the right thing, then think it over. So be like that businessman. Solicit advice, but when it comes to actual practice, ask the expert. We are blessed with Torah teachers that will not make a decision for you. You'll come and ask them a question, whether it be family or business or spiritual, and they'll listen, and they'll tell you, well, this is one perspective, this is another perspective, but you decide. And you walk out frustrated. I came to hear what the Torah says, and instead it gave me different ideas. But if that happens, what he's really saying is the Torah is advising you. Expert advice would be for you to decide which item is most appropriate for your position. So let me wish you much luck and mazel in getting good advice, and a prayer that the expert advice that we give ourselves be the correct one and the true one. Shalom.